I heard my son say it in the middle of Christmas night. Go beg on the street. Those words weren't meant for a stranger. They were meant for my wife, the woman who had taken care of this family for 10 years. When I came up from the wine cellar, the door was already shut. Snow had covered the porch in white silence, and Martha's wool scarf lay alone on the frozen floor. I stood there and understood a cruel paradox. The house I paid for every month was the same house that had just thrown my family out. Before I go on and tell you how that night slowly slipped away, please subscribe to the channel, tap like, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read every single one. And it's those messages that give me the strength to keep telling stories like this. Now, let me take you back to that Christmas night, the moment when everything first drifted off course. I didn't go back inside right away. I stood still for a few seconds, long enough for the cold to cut through my coat and remind me this wasn't a passing misunderstanding. Snow fell steadily, quietly. The mansion, glowing behind the closed door, looked like a painting on a wall. Beautiful, distant, and no longer meant for me. Martha stood by the porch, her hands folded tight against her chest. She wasn't crying. That frightened me more than tears ever could. She stared at the wool scarf on the ground as if it no longer belonged to her. I picked it up, placed it back around her shoulders, then guided her to the car. No one inside opened the door. No apology. Just Christmas music drifting from somewhere deep inside the house. Steady, cheerful, and cold. On the drive, Martha tried to say something, then stopped. I knew she was asking herself where she had gone wrong. I had asked myself the same question before, but not that night. That night, I didn't allow the question to exist. I drove slowly, carefully, as if going any faster would cause everything to shatter all over again. The hotel was downtown. Warm lights, a quiet front desk. I checked us in and handed the key to Martha. She sat on the edge of the bed, silent, her shoulders sinking as if she had finally set down a burden she'd carried for far too long. I poured her a glass of warm water. No alcohol, no advice, just presence. Sometimes silence is the only thing left that keeps a person from falling apart. When Martha drifted off to sleep, I sat in the chair by the window. Snow was still falling. I thought about the party that had been cut short, unfinished plates, half-spoken wishes. I thought about Brandon. I remembered him as a boy, hands covered in paint, proudly showing me a drawing of his dream house. I truly believed I was building something solid. That night I understood that some foundations look strong, but have been hollow for a very long time. Near midnight, my phone vibrated. Not Brandon. A notification from the home security system. Movement in my study. I sat up straight. This time it wasn't concern for property. It was something else. The feeling you get when the pieces begin to find their place. I opened the camera app. The image was clearer than I expected. Brandon and Kimberly, they walked into my study like it belonged to them. No hesitation, no fear. Kimberly went through the drawers. Brandon opened the file cabinet. They spoke in low, hurried voices. I didn't turn on the sound. I didn't need to. Some actions speak clearly enough on their own. I turned off the screen and took a long breath. This wasn't a burst of anger at a dinner party. This was routine, preparation, a plan that had been running quietly behind shared meals and polite greetings. The next morning I woke early. Martha was still asleep, her breathing steadier now. I left the hotel and returned to the house while the sky was still dim. No one stopped me. I opened the door to my study. The familiar scent of old paper and polished wood greeted me. I sat at the desk, powered on the computer, and checked the access logs. The trail appeared in order, dates, times, files opened, copies made. Everything was neat, too neat to be accidental. I didn't get angry. I took notes. I captured screenshots. I saved copies. I did what a lifetime in my profession had taught me to do. Don't assume without data. Don't act without proof. Around noon, I called Martha. She asked if I was okay. I said I was. I told her we'd stay at the hotel a few more days. She was quiet for a moment, then agreed. In her voice, I heard something lighter. Not hope. Trust. That afternoon, I reviewed the footage again. This time, I turned on the sound. I don't need to repeat every word. It's enough to say this. Some sentences once heard can never be forgotten. Not because they're cruel, but because they're casual. Casual as if what they were discussing was simply meant to happen. When the screen went dark, the room fell silent again. I sat there for a long time, not to mourn, but to accept a hard truth. That Christmas night wasn't the cause. It was only the moment everything finally came into the light. I stood up and locked the study door. Outside, the sky had brightened. The snow had stopped. The footprints from the night before were still there, but they would soon disappear. I knew what needed to be done next. Not for revenge, but to close doors that had been opened the wrong way, and to protect the only thing still intact, the woman waiting to wake up in a strange room, who still called me family. That morning, I didn't go back to the hotel right away. I sat in the car, looking at the house through the windshield. Daylight made everything look almost normal. No music, no slammed doors, just a quiet house sitting in the snow. But I knew this silence wasn't peace. It was a cover. I drove off slowly on purpose. There were things that could no longer be delayed. Not because of last night's anger, but because of what I had seen. I understood that if I acted too soon, it would turn into another argument. But if I waited for the right moment, it would be a conclusion. Around midday, I returned to the hotel. Martha was awake, sitting by the window, watching the snow melt in small patches. I didn't tell her what I had watched, not to hide it, but because I needed to be certain before placing another weight on her shoulders. I only said I needed a few days to take care of some things. She nodded, didn't ask more. That trust made me feel the need to be twice as careful. That afternoon, I brought my laptop and an old folder of documents. I chose a quiet cafe and sat in a corner where no one lingered. I reopened the logs, matched timestamps, compared signatures, reviewed the copied files. Everything began to fit together in a way that couldn't be denied. The entries into my study hadn't happened once. They repeated. They followed a pattern. Prepared, deliberate. Then I remembered the apartment in Manhattan, a steady monthly payment. A decision I had made years ago, when Brandon said it was his chance to stand on his own. I had never checked closely. I thought a father's support was enough. Now that carelessness came back to me like a question hanging in the air. I called a broker I knew. Didn't say much. Just asked if anyone had recently inquired about the apartment. He went quiet for a few seconds, then said yes. A couple. Very eager. They had provided full authorization papers. I asked him to send copies. When the email arrived, I wasn't surprised. The signature looked like mine, but it wasn't. A curve in the wrong place. A pause that didn't belong. Small details only the real signer would know. I closed the laptop and made another call, this time to a lawyer. I didn't talk about feelings. I laid out the facts in order. He listened carefully. When I finished, he said slowly, "This wasn't a mistake. I knew that already. I knew it the moment I saw them walk into my study like it was their own." That night, I returned to the hotel late. Martha asked if I was tired. I said a little. She handed me a cup of tea. No questions, no advice. I looked at her and understood something important. Some people stand beside you, not to fight with you, but to remind you why you must remain standing. When night settled in, I opened the recordings again. This time, I listened all the way through, not because I needed more proof, but because I needed to understand. I heard them talk about timing, about the next step, about how I would no longer be a problem. The words were spoken lightly, like a business plan. No hatred, no hesitation, just calculation. I turned off the sound and sat still. In that moment, I didn't think about what to do to them. I thought about Martha, about the wool scarf thrown into the snow. I thought about how far things had gone, for one sentence at a dinner party to become a closed door. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. I called the bank. The voice on the other end was polite. I asked to review the terms, to confirm control over the accounts. I didn't change anything yet. I only asked, only confirmed. Some decisions need to be prepared in silence. On my way out, I ran into Brandon and Kimberly in the lobby. They had just come back from somewhere looking relaxed. Brandon nodded at me, as if Christmas night had never happened. Kimberly smiled softly, a familiar smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. I returned the greeting with proper politeness. No more, no less. A flicker of surprise crossed their faces. Very quick. Perhaps they expected an explosion. I didn't give them that. After they left, I stood there alone. I understood they believed they were safe, that everything was still under control. That belief would make them careless, and carelessness sooner or later always leaves a trace. That afternoon, another email arrived from the broker. An update. A showing had been canceled due to paperwork issues. I read every line carefully. No rush, no relief, just acknowledgement. When the sun went down, I returned to the room. Martha was reading. I sat beside her and said there were things that needed to be handled. My way. She closed the book and took my hand. Didn't ask when, didn't ask how. She only said, "I'm here." That night, I didn't fall asleep right away. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about doors opened without permission, boundaries erased. I knew the next step wouldn't be loud. There would be no shouting, no arguments. It would be a series of cold, precise decisions. And once it began, there would be no turning back. I closed my eyes and let the silence fill the room. And in that silence, I was ready for a strike that made no sound. One aimed not at people, but at the very lines they were standing on to stay upright. The next morning, I didn't wait for the snow to melt. I woke while the city was still wrapped in fog, washed my face with cold water to keep my head clear. The strike I had prepared didn't need emotion. It needed precision. I put on my coat and left the hotel, quietly letting Martha sleep a little longer. Some things, if spoken too early, become heavier than they need to be. I went to the bank as soon as they opened. Not a major branch, just the one I'd worked with for years. The staff recognized me and offered a seat. I laid out the documents and asked them to review the automatic payment orders. My voice was calm, like I was checking a utility bill. I confirmed control of the accounts. I restated the clauses regarding obligations when internal misuse is suspected. No one objected. Those clauses exist for days like this. When everything was clear, I said what needed to be said. Cancel the payments. Immediately. No delay. No exceptions. I requested the bank initiate the recovery process under contract due to authorization documents being used for the wrong purpose. The employee nodded, took notes, printed the confirmation. The paper slid across the desk, thin but heavy. I signed. My hand didn't shake. Outside, I paused for a moment. Not to hesitate, but to breathe. I knew this moment would travel fast. The lines Brandon had been leaning on were just cut. No noise, no announcement. Just silence, beginning to spread. My next call was to the credit card company. I requested all secondary cards be frozen. Reason given: restructuring household spending. No further explanation needed. Systems work very efficiently when you speak their language. Within minutes, confirmation arrived. I looked at the screen, then turned it off. There was nothing to celebrate. Around noon, I called a security firm. Not to make a scene, but to follow procedure. I clarified ownership, temporary occupancy, and requested assistance relocating personal belongings within legal bounds. They asked about timing. I said this afternoon. Some things, if stretched out, turn into arguments. I didn't want arguments. When I returned to the Aspen house, the sky was brighter. Neighbors were out walking, laughing. Everything looked normal. Brandon and Kimberly were still there, enjoying the holiday as if the world had paused. I didn't knock. I opened the door with my own key. The security team came with me. Polite, clear, no extra words. Brandon came out of the living room, surprised. Kimberly followed, frowning. I said briefly that I was reorganizing use of the house during the holiday period. No raised voice, no explanation. I handed them copies of the notice. Kimberly scoffed, asked what kind of performance this was. I didn't answer. I let the staff work. Belongings were packed carefully. Nothing was thrown. No one argued. The politeness of the process made everything feel colder. Brandon started making calls. I guessed to the bank, to the broker, to anyone who might reconnect the line that had just snapped. His phone kept hitting busy signals. I stood aside watching the snow on the steps crushed under boots. Kimberly's tone shifted, from mockery to pleading, then to blame. Brandon grew quieter. I noticed the difference. When money flows, people speak with one voice. When it stops, voices begin to separate. Eventually, I informed them they needed to leave that day. Not an order, a notice. The security team confirmed. They packed their bags and stepped outside under the curious looks of a few neighbors. No one knew what was happening. I didn't need them to. That afternoon, I returned to the hotel. Martha was sitting with a book worry in her eyes when she saw me. I told her things were being handled. She asked if I was sure. I nodded. I didn't say I was doing the right thing. I said I was doing what was necessary. She took my hand and nodded, the way someone does when they've lived long enough beside hard decisions. That evening, my phone vibrated. Brandon, I didn't answer right away. I let it ring a few times. Not as punishment, but to keep the distance that was now required. When I picked up, his voice broke. His first question was about the money. Not Martha, not Christmas night. I listened until he finished, then said we would talk with lawyers present. I didn't hang up. I waited for him to stop. After the call, I sat still. I didn't feel relieved. I felt empty, in a very clear way. Some relationships, when cut, don't leave a wound. They leave a gap. That gap doesn't hurt, but it's cold. Night fell. I stepped out onto the balcony. Snow was falling again, thinner now. I thought about the strike that had just landed. It wasn't loud. It didn't need an audience. But I knew that elsewhere doors were quietly closing. Cards no longer working. Payments no longer arriving. A familiar system was refusing to serve the people who had grown used to leaning on it. I went back inside and closed the door. Some decisions once made don't need to be revisited. I knew the next step would force a direct confrontation. No banks, no paperwork in between. But tonight I allowed myself to stop. Not to rest, but to let silence continue doing its work. The next morning, the silence no longer stayed still. It began to move. I got a call from my lawyer before the sun had fully risen. His voice was calm, but the information wasn't. The Manhattan apartment had been temporarily sealed. The bank had triggered foreclosure procedures due to a contract violation. Everything unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. No faster, no slower. I ended the call and stood by the window, watching the snow outside. I knew Brandon would call again, not because he understood, but because he had been pushed to the edge. When people grow used to standing on solid ground, they don't know what to do when that ground disappears. The call came mid-morning. This time, I answered right away. Brandon's voice was hoarse. He said the apartment was locked. Said the bank had posted notices. Said there had to be some mistake. I listened without interrupting. When he paused to breathe, I spoke slowly. I told him there was no mistake. I reminded him of what he had said to Martha. Not loudly, not word for word. Just this, that some sentences, once spoken, find their way back to where they began. He went silent. Then his tone changed. Pleading, explaining, blaming pressure, blaming Kimberly. I didn't argue. I told him we would meet in person with lawyers present. I gave the place and the time. I made it clear this wasn't a family talk. It was a meeting. He agreed, faster than I expected. That afternoon I arrived early. The snow fell heavier. The wind cut against my face. Brandon and Kimberly arrived late. They stepped out of the car, looking around as if searching for an exit. The meeting room was simple. White lights. Nothing to hold on to but the truth. The lawyer laid everything out. The logs, the signatures, the recordings. No embellishment, no emphasis. I watched Brandon's face as each piece was placed on the table. He lowered his head. Kimberly was different. Arms crossed, eyes cold, as if this were only a temporary inconvenience. When it came time to speak of options, the room grew heavy. The lawyer was clear. Either sign a waiver of inheritance rights and return the misused funds, or let the matter go further. No threats, just paths. I looked at Brandon. I didn't rush him. I let him read every line on his own. He stood up and walked outside. I followed. The snow was ankle deep, the wind stronger. Brandon dropped to his knees. Not because the ground was slippery. I knew that. He said he was sorry. Said he was wrong. Said he would fix things. I stood there listening. I didn't kneel down. I didn't feel victory. I saw a child who had grown up under protection for too long, now unable to stand when the support was gone. Kimberly came out behind us. She didn't look at me. She turned to Brandon and said this was all because he was weak, that if he had been stronger, things would be different. Her words fell onto the snow, clearer than any evidence. Brandon looked up at her, for the first time like she was a stranger. I said the decision was his, not mine, not hers. I went back into the meeting room. I didn't wait for an answer. Some choices need to be made in silence, without an audience. After a while, Brandon came in. Alone, he held the pen. His hand shook. I didn't look away. I didn't stare. I let him sign, line by line, stroke by stroke. When he finished, he set the pen down and exhaled, like someone who had just climbed a steep road. Kimberly didn't sign. She gathered her things and left first. No goodbye. No looking back. I watched her go, not surprised. Some people stay only as long as the benefit remains. That evening I returned to the hotel. Martha asked how it went. I said the hardest part was over. She looked at me as if she wanted to ask more, then didn't. She knew when to stop. I took her hand and felt the warmth solid and real. Outside, the snow kept falling. That night I received one last message from Brandon. He said he had signed, said he would honor the agreement. I replied briefly that I expected him to keep his word. Nothing more. I stood by the window, watching the lights reflect on the snow. The confrontation was over, but the echo remained. I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy for anyone, but some doors once closed need to be locked. Not to punish, but to keep old mistakes from returning. I pulled the curtain and turned back inside. This silence was different from before. It wasn't hiding anything. It was simply the space left behind after everything had finally been put where it belonged. The days that followed moved slowly, as if time itself needed to reset its rhythm. I didn't leave Aspen right away, not because there was unfinished business, but because I wanted everything to settle enough for me to see the consequences of the decisions that had just been made. The silence now wasn't tense. It felt like an empty room after everything has been cleared out, before anything new is brought in. The lawyer completed the final paperwork. I signed each page one by one, without rushing. The sale of the Aspen house was set in motion first. I once thought I would grow old in that place, but it turns out some places exist only to teach you a lesson and then let you go. The Manhattan apartment went on the list as well. I didn't keep anything for myself. Not out of virtue, but because I didn't want those walls to keep reminding me of what went wrong. When everything was arranged, I asked Martha to step out onto the balcony. The snow had almost fully melted, revealing cold, wet stone beneath. I told her my decision. Sell everything. Use the money to establish a scholarship fund in her name for children with no place to rely on. Martha looked at me for a long time. She didn't ask why it would carry her name. She only said that if this was what I believed was right, she would stand with me. The foundation was created quietly. No launch event, no speeches. I signed documents, transferred funds, confirmed each detail. The final amount was larger than I expected. Yet the feeling was the opposite, lighter, as if a weight had finally been set down where it belonged. I didn't think of it as redemption. I thought of it as using what remained to build something that couldn't be taken away. Brandon kept his word. He left Manhattan and moved somewhere smaller. I heard he was working in a warehouse. Early shifts, late shifts. No one officially reported this to me. I didn't ask. The information arrived on its own like scattered fragments. Kimberly filed for divorce. I wasn't surprised. Some relationships are built on temporary ground. When that ground collapses, everything goes with it. I didn't see Brandon again during that time. We didn't cut ties completely, but we didn't hold on either. That distance was necessary for both of us. Some lessons can't be taught with words, only with experience. When everything in Aspen was finished, Martha and I left on a bright morning. No snow, no noise, just a long road ahead. We drove south, stopped when we were tired, continued when we were ready. No tight schedule, no grand destination. Just moving, mile by mile. We chose a small coastal town in Florida. Quiet, modest. No one knew who we were. That felt good. The new house wasn't large. It had a front porch, sea air drifting through every afternoon. Martha planted a few pots of flowers. I repaired the fence, simple work, done with our own hands. In the mornings I walked to the beach. Damp sand under my feet, steady waves. I thought about the years behind me, about decisions I once believed were right. I didn't blame myself. I didn't forgive myself either. I accepted that I had done the best I could with what I knew at the time, and when I knew more, I changed. One afternoon, Martha asked if I had regrets. I thought for a moment and said there were things I wished I had seen sooner, but regret is a heavy word. I don't carry it anymore. She nodded and took my hand. We watched the sun sink lower. No need to say anything else. The scholarship fund began operating. I received a few thank you letters. I read them slowly, then put them away. I didn't hang them on the wall. I didn't need reminders. It was enough to know that somewhere out there some children would have one more small chance. That was enough. One evening I received a message from Brandon. Not long. He said he was trying. Said thank you for not pushing things too far. I replied that I hoped he would keep standing on his own. No advice, no criticism, just a clean ending to a sentence. As night fell, Martha and I walked along the shoreline. No rush, cool wind, steady waves. I realized I was breathing more easily, not because everything was perfect, but because I no longer had to defend what was wrong. Family, in the end, isn't something held together by money or power. It's how people choose to treat one another when things are no longer convenient. I held Martha's hand a little tighter. The waves rolled in ahead of us. The past stayed behind, not erased, but no longer chasing us. And that was enough to begin a new morning. My story ends here. Thank you for listening. If this story gave you something to think about, please subscribe to the channel, tap like, and share it so others can hear it too. Every bit of your support helps stories like this continue to be told. Thank you for your time, and I wish you peace within your own family.